to Mariano, I think would be next in line. So Mariano, if you want to set the tone tonight, whenever you're ready.
Let me just pull the
Yeah.
the right paper. Sorry, I was not expected to be thrust in a leadership role.
You've earned your stripes, Mariano.
Hold on, agenda.
Josh, you want to just start with the school leader report?
Yeah, I'm going to start with mission moment. I'm not messing around tonight.
Mission moment? Okay.
Yeah, you know it.
Sorry, I just managed to get it open. So yeah, go ahead, Josh. Sorry.
So I'm going to share my screen. Recently, I've had the help of a data intern who's much more than that. He's worked in a network as their data analyst and has recently moved to another job in non-education, but likes education. And so he's been doing some number crunching and data analysis with like big data. So I gave him some state data that is available publicly through NYSCD's site, which provides essentially all of the information one would ever want about every school in New York State about graduation, broken down into like cohort years, demographic groups, et cetera, et cetera. And so he's been playing with that. And so today, a couple of hours ago, he shared this with me. Let's see, where can I go to find that? I'm gonna go here. So let's not share yet. Let's just quick pull it up first. Get out of here. Go here. Yeah, here it is. That's New York. And boom. So using a program called Tableau, which is a big data set database, he's broken things down. And my question for him was just like, hey, where do we rank with regard to our 4-year graduation rate with the entry cohort of 2016, nowadays class, with regard to New York City? And so you see that here. This is good data for Chris to use with recruitment too. But you see the ranking of schools across New York City, high schools. And these are charter schools, by the way. So we've broken down and narrowed the sample to charters only because it's just a big data set if you start including everyone. And then you'll see the number of students per cohort across sites. And so you see up here us at number 2, New Visions. And as you scroll down, you'll see a number of kind of familiar schools. Souther's your sister school. Brooklyn Prospect, Achievement First. Mesa started with us as just a high school, 2013. Harlem Children's Zone. Ascend is another big network, another Achievement First. Democracy Pep you may have heard of, KIPP, etc. So I think there's some things to be proud of and just hustle and getting kids to the finish line. And so I think this is rich. So I'm going to figure out how to use this well to then put it out there that we are doing our best work for kids and families.
Do we have a sense, Josh, that their graduation requirements are relatively homogeneous among
same thing. Otherwise, they get into a situation where kids aren't going to graduate from their school, so they transfer to other schools on a dime because the requirements at other schools might be the ones that are. That's in the case of requirements being higher or more rigorous than the state requirements. So this is good stuff. And then I think I'll also share here, let me go into this. I've got the data for Brooklyn too. Let me do that. So that's New York State, New York City. And then
is the state better than the city, generally speaking?
What's that?
Is the state overall better than the city?
They're not that far off. They're both. State is slightly, I think it was 2 points higher than the city. I think it was something like that. There was a 2-point difference overall.
Like they're generally better for test scores, right?
This is graduation rate. The state is higher. The state is higher for test scores. And I think in general, state across the board is serving a more kind of advantaged or population than New York City. So I think
Yep.
there's disadvantage there. So yeah, this is can you guys see? You can't see this. I'm not sharing my screen. This is Brooklyn. No, that's New York too. Darn it. Brooklyn. There it is. No. Yeah, that's Kings County. There it is. Share. And so this is the same data, not for New York City, but for just Brooklyn in general. And so you'll see some of the same schools that are located in Brooklyn, but based on the graduation rate last year at our school, we had the highest four-year graduation rate of charters in Brooklyn. So obviously, I mean, we know what the work is with regard to kind of rigoring up and opening even more doors for our kids, but this is a really great place to be in year one. We think about open doors at a sort of like foundational level. A graduation diploma gets people jobs first and foremost, and allows for other doors to be open. And if kids don't have that, they're really in a disadvantage. So some good stuff here. Any comments or questions on this?
I'll make sure to let my sister know.
Yeah, press that.
Right above.
She could have been teaching science at our school.
Exactly.
This is good to see. I mean, especially, you know, seeing like, you know, how well they did, how well we have it in Brooklyn, as well as like, you know, seeing the different schools on there.
Yeah.
You know, you see Summit Academy and Achievement First. You know, a lot of people always talk about Achievement First, but to know that Unity is number one, that's really good. That's really good.
Yeah, I mean, this is all about hustle and heart. We're still messy.
Absolutely.
We're a messy little school that's trying to sort of make it, but I think the heart and hustle is there. So some good data to
Absolutely.
show, again, which we'll want to float to others. So that's one. The other piece I wanted to share today relates to just a couple of spotlights of some students that have graduated from our school that were part of this cohort. So let me jump to that. So I got to chat with our director of college and career readiness, Eric Gonzalez, who y'all know, yesterday, and we got to talking about some students, and he was able to kind of update me on some of the communication with students and some of the students who he's really proud of with regard to the way in which they've proceeded in their first year in college. And so I want to highlight them. Just 3 students here. We had 82, 83 graduates, so there are a number of students that we could highlight. Here are 3. So the first student graduate is Guyton O. Trudy knows Guyton well.
Very well.
Guyton was an advisee of mine back in 2013. I wrote a recommendation for him for college. He now goes to SUNY Oneonta. He's in his 2nd semester. He is on campus, so he's not at home. He's been on campus since the beginning. He's a first-generation going college student in his family. In his first year, he's serving as an RA at the school, which is kind of a big deal. It's not easy to do in your freshman year. His grades have been strong and consistent throughout, and I think he had a mixed experience at Unity where there were some semesters in which he crushed it and semesters in which he didn't crush it. So it's good to kind of see him stepping up here in his first semester, which is a big deal. It's a big moment for him. In addition to like being an RA, he's got another job that he's hustling with at school, in addition to having a job lined up for the summer. So in just thinking about like good things happening in one's first year of college, where this is the first experience his family's had with going to college, these are good things. So that's Guyton O. In addition to Guyton, I want to spotlight Anaya L., who is now in her 2nd semester at Penn State. She earned honor roll status in her first semester. She is a freshman as president of her campus's Black Student Union. So she's leading the way. She told me once that she wants my job, and I don't doubt that she'll probably be a school leader someday. Although she then checked herself and said, no, I just want to be a principal. So I think that's in the works. She might be someone coming in and leading Unity someday. But she's pretty impressive with regard to like just her being poised, being confident, the way she presents herself, the way she advocates for herself, kind of beyond her years in that way, and it shows in her first semester of college. So Anaya, remember that name?
And she's on the same campus that I started at. At
Oh,
Schuylkill
yeah?
Haven, yeah. She's at the same campus.
Okay. Small
Yeah.
world. That's right. You were Penn State. Yep. Yeah.
hmm
Yep. So that's Anaya. And then finally, Tyrese. Tyrese, another came in with us in 6th grade. I've known him since 2013. He's at Gutman Community College this year, which is in Midtown. He's also a first generation college student. He's kicking butt. He's won himself a scholarship this past year at Gutman. He was also a recipient of the Gutman National Society of Leadership and Success, and is part of a summer program there. He's just stepped up. Like I think he was like on the brink in school, and like very close. Like had the will, like like wanted to do it, but would often just maybe not quite get there. And I think right now he seems to be getting there. So some good things happening for him in his first year in college. So a couple of highlights here. Again, we start with our mission, which is to empower students, the scholars and citizens they may lead fulfilling academic, professional, and personal lives. And I think we're seeing some of that happen here as kids move on from our school and make us proud. So that's the mission moment for today. Any tears of joy, some applause? Feel good about
Very,
some good things.
very
Be
excited to
proud.
hear that. Yeah.
Proud of what
proud
you
moment.
covered in.
I'll say I remember Guyton from mentoring as well.
Sure you do. You mentored him hard, I'm sure.
I was hoping for a photo or something though.
Yeah, he would post you up now, Jake. He's probably 6'2", 6'3" now.
Yeah.
So let's jump out of that. That's mission moment for today. And I think, Maureen, you can continue to carry the torch, or Jake, if you want to pick up, we're on the second agenda item. Coin toss.
I was on mute. Sorry, I was telling Jake to go ahead, but otherwise fine. Josh, go ahead with the head of school report.
Sure. So I'm putting it on the screen. I want to spend a little more time with this today, because I think most of the meeting is here. So if you read this, like, I won't bore you. I'll add some value here, but a lot of what we'll talk about is here. So I think just to highlight a couple of headlines from the last month. We meet monthly and things go on in school, and so I want to just relay some of those things that have gone on that are worth noting. Give me 1 second. Here it is. So I think with regard to the second item for like headlines, I think our pod programming is now up to 52, 53 students at this time. We're looking to continue to expand it out. We made a few hires recently in the pod leader position, which are essentially proctors. And so feel good about continuing to sort of add to that, and kids who need it most take part. So there's some data we have that shows that, like, because of this program, students who were struggling in remote land are now showing some signs of promise with regard to attendance, participation, and grades as indicators. So pleased there. Item C, we have had kids continue to be admitted into college. I don't have the exact numbers right now, but we're closing in on some of the stats from last year, where I feel like it was going to be tougher this year because of the manner in which we're conducting things. But I think we're pleased right now. I think what we're seeing is there are perhaps some kids getting into more selective colleges than last year, which I think is just a sign of us being better in our work, not necessarily students. And so we've had some kids get in the Bard and Skidmore and Trinity and Wheaton, to name a few. And so I think that feels good to continue to sort of expand the list of colleges that kids are admitted to and give them more options to choose from in the end. So that feels good. Item F, I mentioned this earlier. So
do you have a sense just like how many of the kids who applied to college, how many have gotten in on a percentage basis?
So last year, 100% of our kids applied. And I believe we were like in the high 90s or mid 90s with regard to at least one admission. Everyone got in. And then from there, we ended up at about 80% in September of last year of kids then matriculating. So there was a bit of a drop off over the summer. And I would say right now we're probably in the mid 70s.
Okay.
So I need an update there, but that's probably where we are. My sense right now is that we'll probably start at a slightly lower point. We've got some kids who aren't interested in college, and that's okay as long as they've got career plans like in the works and they seem good alongside kind of family making those decisions. So we'll probably start at a slightly lower percentage in terms of applying and admittance, and then work from there. And I think the numbers will probably be somewhat proportional through matriculation. With regard to item F, so I signed on a high school co-principal today and really excited about it. It's been in the works since February, so it's been some time. There were a couple of strong candidates that kind of came through, a couple from like seasoned, well-regarded high schools. So I feel good about the pool and about us attracting some talented people. So that feels good. That's a big deal. And so the onboarding work begins very soon. And then finally, I mentioned this sort of a moment ago, item J. At the high school, I mentioned that pod programming is having an impact on kids when you look at the sort of pre and post, before pod, after pod, and grades and attendance and participation increasing as a result of pods. We're doing small group interventions at the middle school for kids that showed struggle in the first trimester, and the same kind of data is presenting itself. So, okay. I mean, essentially, it's not rocket science. We're seeing some struggle among these subgroup of students. We need an intervention. Here's the intervention. It's small group, groups of 5 or 6 students with a teacher in the afternoons when teachers have perhaps a block in which they're not teaching and have time to then devote to students, and then giving students that more customized attention. And as a result of that, we're seeing participation increase, attendance increase, and the caliber of work is represented by grades increase. So some good things that I think we then want to borrow from when thinking about our summer programming and programming moving forward. So those are some headlines. Any questions there about what I've mentioned or perhaps other things on the list here? I'll move this forward then. I'll talk about enrollment momentarily. We'll talk about finance at 7:45 with Leslie. I'll mention lottery now. So we had our lottery back on April 1st. We had 226 sixth grade applicants, which is, I think, 8 off from last year, which I believe is a feat given that there were some barriers that we were working through this year with not having some in-person fairs in the fall as we did last year. Last year's fairs produced about 70 applications. So I think some of the hustle on Chris's part and on the recruitment team part helped to sort of narrow that gap over the past month, where we did have a fairly healthy number of sixth grade applications, which is the grade that we devote most of our time to. So that feels good. In the 9th grade, we had 214 applications for about 45 seats. There are approximately 50 middle school students in the 8th grade looking to come to our high school next year, which is slightly higher than the number last year and the year before. So that also feels promising and good, and we'll look to continue that, particularly now that we've got some data on graduation that we can kind of tout and put out there to families as they make decisions about where their kids go in high school. So those are good things. And then I think the new data is just, I'd say that the recruitment team's off to a fairly strong start with some momentum in having applications translate to matriculation, which is essentially cold calls, or not cold calls, but scheduled calls with families who have applied and then been admitted, and then coaching them through the sort of paperwork process. And so, Chris, at this point in time, where are we in the 6th grade with regard to number of calls made where families are planning to matriculate?
I believe we have about 65 registration calls for 6th graders completed. So they filled out the enrollment packet with a Unity staff member over the phone, 65 6th graders.
So the goal is 94. I think at around this time last year, we wouldn't have had this many. We would have had this many over a month's time. So we're expediting things so that we strike while the iron's hot. So that feels good right now. We're cautiously optimistic and continue on the ground to do the work. Any questions on the lottery? Cool, I'll move this forward. I got to speak with Jake about this here that you see in front of you during the SLC call, and it was just a way of me just conveying some of the priorities I see as we close out the spring term successfully in rank order. And so the things that are most important are at the top, where I've got kind of like the category of priority, and then some of the goals that I think make that priority or indicate that that priority was successfully completed. And so first and foremost, I think, grades and credit accrual at the high school especially is a big deal as kids move toward graduation. And so I've got a couple of indicators there for like what that means. We will have more students in summer school this year as we had last year, just due to the sort of dynamic. So we're kind of planning for that while also trying to sort of minimize summer school by proactively supporting students more heavily now as we close out the second semester. And right now we're just embarking on the fourth quarter. So I feel good about the way in which our team is reviewing and monitoring grade level data, class level data, and then circling in when there seems to be maybe a concern about what kids are showing based on grades. Other things here, I won't go into detail. I'll mention that because I think that is probably number 1, 2, and 3 on the list. And then these other items are also really important. I'm excited to have kids embark on the AP exams in May. There are mock exams going on now on Fridays at the high school. So that feels good. And then obviously our team is everything. So right now mid-year reviews are happening, agreements are happening, hiring is happening all at once as we also then think about enrollment for next year, course schedules for next year, how many kids are taking Algebra 1, how many kids are taking geometry, how many kids are taking Algebra 2, all that thinking kind of goes into creating a puzzle that then results in school and kids attending classes. So a lot there. And then I think there's some strategic thinking that we'll embark on a bit tonight, both during the sort of session now and during the executive session. And that includes sort of summer planning and planning for the fall. And then keeping our eye on alumni success and making sure kids are finishing strongly in their first year, so they're set up to embark on their second year in the fall. So those are big priorities. Any questions there? Any comments, things you think that perhaps aren't represented that should be?
Do you want to touch on state tests now, or do you want to do that later in the SLC section?
I'm going to grab it at the miscellaneous section a bit further down. So I'll move on now. And what I'd say about summer and fall planning is the following. It's unique for a number of reasons and bullets here. We're still kind of in a pandemic. We're coming out of it, and coming out of it's really just weird for people. We haven't had interactions with folks. Going back to a school with lots of people is going to be hard. And so devoting time to reacclimating to that is going to be important for us. I think in addition to like the uniqueness of all of that, I think another unique aspect is like right now, the state has been fairly good about providing funding to support, to up interventions and things for kids, so that we've got the resources we need to step up. And so these are all kind of like good things given the challenges we're facing. So I think that's sort of like what is in our way with regard to summer. And so when I think about priorities and goals for summer academy or summer school, summer experiences more in general, like obviously academic remediation plays a major role in the first priority with regard to making sure kids are ready for the next grade level and set up to succeed. We've got a strong counseling team, both in mental health and academics. So I'm feeling good about our socio-emotional support to students as they onboard back to in-person schooling. I think that's a benefit of our model in school. It's shown itself in a number of ways in benefiting kids, including persevering through graduation. And then like fun stuff, like extracurriculars, all kinds of things. So I've got some ideas on how to like get that out to the team and have the team be creative and putting forth some ideas on excursions, experiences for kids over the course of the summer with some of the additional resources that we do have available. And then with that comes staff too. Like staff have been cooped up, and so getting staff feeling confident, feeling ready to go. I mean, there are about 10 staff members who have yet to meet in person, and we hired them last spring, which is wild, but like it's been remote. And so all that is going to happen over the coming months as we get back into school. And so it's a lot, physically, emotionally, psychologically, et cetera. So want to be kind of like aware of all that.
Hey, Josh, my favorite question, what % of the staff is vaccinated at this point?
I don't have that exact data on hand right now. I've got data from about a month ago on that. I just don't have it handy.
Okay.
Chris, if you can check that from the
I think
staff
that's up to know,
survey.
and it's probably stale because it seems that availability has expanded quite a lot in the past month. So
Yeah. Yep. So I think
have you thought about what you're going to do? I mean, are you going to encourage? Are you going to require? Or
we're doing exactly what sort of is being asked of us from the state, which is to like encourage, like based on science, encourage it. But beyond that, I don't think schools right now. I know there's been some news about colleges recently taking firmer stances on things, but I think we're just following suit right now with regard to encouraging it and making time for it if there's conflict. So take the afternoon, go see your doctor, go to the hospital. That's fine.
have you thought about once people are back in, whether or not certain areas are going to be, or certain functions or whatever are going to be only open to people who have a vaccine? You know, I know that's what some, not in the school area, but
Yeah.
in other workplaces, it's like, there's talk of, like cafeterias, things like that, being gyms. I know that it's not exactly the same thing as you, but there's thought of like certain areas where you have more density being limited to people who got their vaccine only.
Yeah. No, I mean, I know that like Brown 2 days ago announced that like before students and staff return to campus, everyone has to be vaccinated. It's a requirement, and they feel like they can do that legally. And so I think for us, I think the best move right now is to follow the guidance of SED and follow the guidance of our council.
Yeah, I mean, it's fine to follow, but I think you need to carefully think about it. Right.
Yeah. So with regard to fall, it's a nice segue in. Here are just some broad strokes on what I envision and what seems to be the case right now. If I were to predict out what school will sort of feel like. And so I'm looking now at the bottom of page 3 and the top of page 4. I think with regard to safety, a lot of the same sort of guidelines in effect. And I think families and staff and students, really being cautious and aware of these things happening and it functioning well as a school for us. So that's one. With regard to programming, and I brought this up, I guess, in our messaging to staff and families and students, all stakeholders back in April when we made the decision to continue with remote through the year. But I foresee 5 days of in-person instruction. So all kids having the opportunity to attend school each day of the week. It could be the case that we have limited remote learning. I think that's to be determined and based on family input and guidelines from state and city. But I think for right now, I'm assuming there would be some of that. And so I think for planning purposes, a safe bet would be 80-20. Maybe it's 70-30, maybe it's 90-10, but it allows for us to plan accordingly and adjust. So I think that's the assumption right now. At the middle school, we should have the space we need in the building to have all students in. And so we've got to do some deep dives on specific spaces within the school, but it's big enough. At the high school, it's tighter. And so Jake, to double back on a question you posed out last week, with our gymnasium, technically, we could have all stakeholders in our building. It's just a question of like how we use that space and what limitations might exist within some spaces. How many people can you have in your gymnasium under guidelines, for example, would be a question that would come up from families and staff. I anticipate. So there's some work to do there, but it's tighter, but technically with 3 feet social distancing, we've got space. And I'll double back to that a bit later with some other updates. The remote learning model, there are a couple of iterations we're looking at. Want to make sure it's consistent, it's simple, like kids are experiencing the same thing every day, and that it's flexible in case there's like more students moving from a remote to in person or vice versa. And so just being prepared for anything and everything. So there are a couple of iterations that I've listed here, but we're debating and continuing to sort of gain information about what would be best. But the big headline is that like we're making every effort to be in person fully come September. Questions there about broad ideas on fall and what to expect?
For the limited remote, will that be kids sort of watching what's going on in person, or will it be a separate remote program?
Those are the iterations there. So you're right. So option one is, and this is actually going on at a couple of private schools I'm aware of. It's like teachers are mic'd up, and then like kids are at home experiencing class where the teachers are mainly working with kids in the school physically, but like if you're remote, you're still able to kind of observe and take part. I think the one up I'd want to provide here is I'd want to staff up a little bit to provide some remote support, so that like maybe there's a roaming teacher or two who's able to sort of move into Zoom land with the 5 students that are taking Algebra 1 remotely, check in with them, et cetera, to make sure that like they're supported, know what to do, et cetera, et cetera. That's one iteration. It gets the more basic. The more intensive would be to like devise a schedule. And like as we've begun to play with those ideas, there is a path for that at the middle school where like things are easier and cleaner because you've got kids in the same classes for the most part over the course of the day. And so there might be a block that's a remote block of students. At the high school, you've got kids mixed up depending on their course needs and their interests. So it's not as clean. So I don't think we could do it at the high school. At least we haven't envisioned the path yet. I mean, the good thing, a lot of other schools are kind of experimenting with this too and figuring it out. So we'll continue to collect and steal ideas that are promising for us. But yeah, the 2 iterations you mentioned are the 2 possibilities I see within an infinite number of others.
For what it's worth, what I hear is that the hybrid is low efficacy or low effectiveness, and that even if you have to offer a more limited option of courses in the high school, it might be better to have like a fully, for the people who are, I mean, it'll probably depend to some degree on how many people you have opt out of in person. If it's, 2 to 5%, maybe you just have to let them have the mic'd up option.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's sort of, to me at least, if it's 10% plus, I would try to have even if it scale down the curriculum, have a remote only program.
Yeah, and that's another possibility to like adjust the course offerings somewhat. Yeah.
FYI, at my sister school, Josh, they're doing, I think all the teachers are in the school. And if the kids want to come in, this is right now, if the kids want to come in, they're allowed to. And the teachers are teaching in their classrooms, and the Zoom is being recorded. It's Zoom if you're not there, and then if you're there, you're in the classroom.
Right.
So she's teaching to both at the same time. What I don't know is what percentage of kids are in the school. She said a number around 100, but I don't know how many people are in the high school. So 130 kids.
It's probably about 25% of their school.
So that's what that is then.
Yeah. Interesting. So yeah, and like to go back to your point, Jake, I think, I think it's vindicating somewhat to kind of hear that the sort of hybrid program isn't effective. I think we saw some of the limitations of that back in the summer of last year, which is why we then went with the remote. But you're seeing the city now come out over the past month and a half with like, all right, there's going to be no remote. Or hybrid. We're doing away with that, but there'll be a remote program, and then we'll do in person too. So it's kind of one or the other. So let me jump us forward. I think we'll talk about facility stuff a bit later, so I'll jump over that, and we'll move into sort of testing mode here. So I wanted to provide a quick update on kind of where things are with our testing, and I'll start with just some background. So I think with regard to state testing this year, parents must opt in versus opt out, which is typically the case. So by default, in prior years, everyone is expected to test, and then if you want to opt out, you have to sort of like sign something and do so. Now it's the inverse this year, and that's coming from state. The exams at the middle school level are condensed from 1 day. I'm sorry, from 2 days to 1 day. So they're different exams. They're covering the same material, but are not the same as what we've seen in the past. And then guidelines from the state are that schools operating remotely are not expected to reopen solely to administer exams. And so that's some of the guidance. Finally, I think exam results are not consequential for students or schools from an accountability standpoint this year. So the state essentially has been forced to administer exams to then receive federal funding. And so what the state has done is they've sort of said, we'll administer the minimum number of exams that we have to, and just do it so that we're abiding by federal regs, and that's it. And so it's a different scene this year with the way in which things are being administered.
How are you going to track performance if you don't have exam results?
Yeah. So I think with that, the issue is that it seems like only a small percentage of middle school and high school students are going to be sitting for the exam this year. And so I would guess 10 to 20%. We had 10% of our students opt in at the middle school. So, in with regard to kind of tracking progress and growth, you've got a different exam than in prior years, and you've got a sample size that is 1/4 to 10% of what it was in the past. And remember, this is a normed exam, so you've got a very different population you're comparing against. So I think the ability to assess reliably growth or progress is not something that's realistic this year, given the tools and sample of students who are testing.
And so how else are you going to measure it if not through those exams?
Yeah, good question. So what we're seeing is just one more point here is that based on my communication with other schools and what I've seen, a number of like the major charter networks that tend to be sort of very test centric in their approach are sitting this one out. And so Success, for example, which is probably the most well known, is not having any students test whatsoever this year. And that's elementary school, middle school, and high school. And speaking with some folks at Uncommon, I know, which is also pretty test centered with regard to approach, they're just not pushing it. Like it's not going to offer reliable data on growth. So the question becomes why. So I think for us, I'm a proponent of testing and figuring out where kids stand each year, and I'm a proponent of holding schools accountable for not demonstrating doing their students well. But I just don't see this exam offering reliable data that allows for us to sort of assess growth. So we're taking the same
data better than no data, though?
Well, I think no. But I think we've got arguably better data that we can use this year, and so I think my sense is or the position I'm taking here is that we follow guidelines of state and provide accommodations for kids that want to test in, and then with regard to like what we care about most, are kids growing and learning? Are we setting kids up to have doors open beyond high school? We focus on the exams that we use already. And so we use reading exams, and that's FONIS and Pinnell testing for students who are in need of reading interventions. We use STAR, which we've used on 2 sittings thus far, and we'll have a 3rd administration in May. That arguably is better this year because there's a larger sample size. There's a lot of historical data there. It hasn't changed dramatically from one year to the next. And so I think that's probably our best bet. And then finally, we've got AP exams, which I think are best for students, as they will provide students who do well college credit, And it allows for us to sort of look at the number of students who score 1s, 2s, 3s, or 4s on the AP exams across the 10 or 12 different AP courses we're offering this year versus last year versus the year before that.
But those
So
are just high
that's
school
the
students,
suite
right?
that I think is our best ability to kind of gauge like the degree to which there's been backslide, stagnance, or forward movement.
But AP is just high school, right?
AP is just high school, right?
And STAR, to me, we just started using it. I don't know. The more I thought about this after we had our SLC call, I do feel it's a mistake to not push taking the state exam, because it's really the only longitudinal data we have for our students.
I think that, I mean, the issue that I see and that others have seen and commented on is that you're going to have, again, about 10% to 20% of students sitting for the exam, and it's a norm referenced exam. And then it's half the exam that it's been in the past. So it's not offering the sort of reliable growth data from one year to the next that you might get if you were using apples to apples exams from one year to the next. So I think if it were not that, I'd agree, and it would be worth sort of moving toward. I think in this case this year, I do think that STAR is going to give us better data than the different conditions with state exams this year.
But with STAR, we really only have, this will be like our 12-month mark, or our first.
Yeah, the comparison is not longitudinal here, nor could we, because we've never used it before. So we sort of knew that going in. But what we can do is we can compare growth from September to December to June. So we do have that ability. So that's the window that we're in operation. So
I feel like we have no ability to test sort of what's happened since COVID, and just compare it to other years. I don't know. I just don't see. It just seems to me like too important a marking point for our, even if the state doesn't look at it at all, it's something that we should care about and know about to know how good a job we're doing. And I hear you that it's not that it's a, when you say normed, it's sort of like a curved test, and so there's going to be less denominator to curve it appropriately, and there'll be some selection bias and all that kind of stuff. But it's still, to me, it still seems way better than having, just STAR and a few other points here and there.
Yeah, I think it not like, to me, like square one is the data going to be reliable? And if the answer is no, then we shouldn't do it. If it were yes, then it's like, okay, so we've got some other kind of like barriers we've got to work through, such as we're a remote school. How do we get 100% of our kids in to test? And like, that would be the effort. But I don't even think that's worth the effort, given that the tests aren't going to be reliable. And like, we're not even, and just to, we're like in the middle of the pack with regard to like the degree to which we sort of like see these exams as being the sort of see all tell all. If we've got CMOs out there that do everything they can around these test exams and they're sitting them out, to me, like there's an indicator there that's worth listening to.
Yeah,
To
but
me,
hold
it's
on.
like success can sit it out because they do so much testing
Correct.
on their own, and they have their own logic.
Yeah, CMO has like a much wider cut of students and a much larger set of data that they can measure people against, right? I think it's a different call.
For what it's worth, Classical is I'm pretty sure pushing to get their students tested.
And they're one of the hardest core test schools in the city. So I get it. I would suspect that they would do that. And I'd like to sort of see where it ends up in the end with regard to reliability. Trudy or Sal, what input do you guys have here?
I think that why can't, I don't have an input as of right now. I have to really think about that, because I feel like I hear what Jake is saying in regards to testing to see how we compare, but also too, the kids have been doing, can we use like the day-to-day, the test scores that they've had? I'm not a proponent for like state tests. That's just my thing. So I just want to I don't want to put in an input in here. Just not yet.
Josh, what are you saying is the difference between the testing, that same test in the past versus now? You said it's half the test and
Yeah, it's a
couple of
one-day
things.
test instead of a 2-day test. And
Sure.
you know, as Jake said, there's like you've got a very small sample in comparison over years, and I think with that there's going to be some selection bias with regard to who sits for the exam and who doesn't.
Right.
And so that will then kind of skew results to make them, in my mind, unreliable.
Yeah, it's just
And-
how are
and
you
what
going to
is
say
the-
all the
Unreliable
kids
in a
in
way that I
school?
feel like let's rely on what we do already rather than try
Yeah.
to force it. And we've got other options here, which I think is a good thing. And I think we came together in the fall and said, hey, look, or in the spring of last year, we're making some decisions about some of these other external exams, providing some meaningful information about progress and growth. So we now have them installed. So I think they're, to me, the best vehicle given
Mhm.
the terrain, which is imperfect, that we're now working through.
Mhm.
So I think, Josh, where I come from is like you're in an era where for a year you've been teaching differently from what you've been doing before. There's broad suspicion among everybody that remote school is not as effective as in-person school. I would think.
I would call it a
any of-
reality. I don't think there's any suspicion. It's real.
Okay, but so I would think we'd want to know by how much, right? And even if it's not perfect data, it's sort of like, how ugly is this? Like, how much are we talking about?
But if it's imperfect, it's not going to give us that information.
Well, it's not going to give you imperfect information, but it's better than no information.
But that's
And-
not the case here.
It's never going to be perfect. I mean, there's
No,
always
and-
going to
No,
be.
but it's
Hold on, but hold on.
flawed.
It's like, like the city population or the state population or whatever it is, like it's huge. So even if you get 20% of the kids taking it, and by the way, there's probably more than that outside of the city.
Yeah.
You know, it's still, I would think it's still a pretty statistically significant data set that you would get. So I mean, I guess I have to ask, are we worried that it's going to be ugly, and is that why we're not pushing people to take it?
We're
No, I
worried.
don't think that's the case.
No, in fact, I mean, if we had good data, I'd love for us to take it. In fact, but I think the issue is like, there's no benefit to it. It's going to be ugly no matter what.
Well,
And it doesn't matter because no one's being held accountable to it. So this is really just an exercise.
A benefit to knowing, like, how do kids compare to the kids who took it last year and the year before and the year before?
But we're not getting that with this data because the exam's different.
I guess, is it ultimately up to us to decide we're taking it with a grain of salt, though? In
It's
other
up
words,
to me.
even if we were to take it, we could still go in with our eyes open, knowing what you're saying, Josh, and say, hey, listen, this is imperfect. It's not the same. It's not apples to apples, but there's still an exercise in going through the motions of having the kids go through testing. You know, it challenges them just in terms of testing.
I think that's at odds with the state recommendation, which is like, if you're remote, you should not reopen your school solely to test students. And
But then
I fundamentally agree with that. I think
But it's
philosophically, I
very-
agree with that.
But it's very much in keeping with the federal government's recommendations. So you're just choosing. I mean, to me, the political reality of this is the state's not doing it because they're going to be embarrassed because they did horribly this year, and that's why they don't want to take the test.
No, I don't think that's
No, I
true,
don't
Jake.
think so.
I don't think that I think
No.
it's also true that like it's been incredibly hard for families and students and society, and they don't think this is a good use of time.
But I'm saying it's been hard for besides the whole country, right?
No, it's been especially hard in New York City.
Yeah.
I agree, but I mean, listen, I don't think that. So, but Zach, so you're saying it basically it's been hard. The level of education in New York has been lower this year. To me, that's why the state is not recommending people take the test. It's not because it's too much of an effort to get people who are out of school to come back into school. There's a political embarrassment issue.
Well, that's also, I mean, I think that's also a challenge. That's a reality, which is if we were to push things dramatically, and just like put everything on the floor, which mind you, like would then create some trade-offs in terms of planning for next year and other things, which I think would be a bad decision. Those trade-offs, those things we're doing now are important for setting things up for next year when we're back in normal conditions. But let's just say we put that all on pause and said, you know what, we're going to go all out. We're just going to make sure everyone tests, and we're going to crush it. I think we probably get 50 to 60% of our families in there at most. And the other families say, nope, I'm opting out and you're not making me opt in. Then what do you do?
So then we still at least get a much better slice than having 10%.
At a pretty dramatic cost though.
And just think
so
about
we get imperfect data. We put a whole lot of effort into getting families in to an imperfect exam, and then are giving up a whole number of things that we could be doing with our time to do that instead. I just think it's just bad decision making in my mind.
But also to me, keep in mind that there's like the 6th graders who started Unity, last year, who will now have 2 years of not having ever taken a state test. It's like when they go in to take the state test next year, like every time the reps to me matter, and the testing situation and the dynamic matters, and you're sort of robbing them of that.
No, I don't.
I don't agree with that.
Go ahead, Trudy.
I just don't agree that we're robbing them. It's just a lot of work to. I don't think that it would be an embarrassment to the city when you said that taking the test. I don't think that. I disagree with that. But you're entitled to your opinion.
I think like the city and state know they've done a poor job of. I'm not saying Unity, but like the public schools have done. There have been a lot of reports.
Excelled. There are some kids that have excelled during this time. There's some kids that have really done well during this time, and the teachers have put in a lot of work to make sure that the kids are up to a standard. It's just that I think it's hard to ask a parent there's a lot of parents that have been dealing with a lot of issues to send their kids out to test, when a lot of parents know that it's an option. So once they know that it's an option, they're going to already opt out. So you're going to have like maybe 10% of kids come into the school to take a test, but you're going to compare them to 90% of everybody else? That's an unfair margin.
We always have the option tops out, right?
Yeah.
But it's a little different this year, Jake, in that they've switched it up. In that, like in prior years, you've had the option of opting out, but by default, you start by being in. Yeah. Now they change it so that like you have to opt in, and by default, you're out. So it requires and they've done that purposefully so. But it does put the onus then on us to then kind of convince families that like this is the thing. And again, we may disagree on like the reliability of the exam, but I just don't think it's the best use of our scarce resources or time when thinking about the other competing commitments that, for example, I listed out up above. Like those things are more important this year, and sitting this out would allow for us to see those things through. And using the other exams that we have to squeeze out as much value about the growth that's happened and growth that hasn't happened for individual kids and individual grades in content areas, I think is the optimal route.
You don't think that preparing for an exam like makes kids study and loop back to stuff that they needed to think about again and sort of, make the learning gel a bit? Like you don't think there's a benefit, even if you debate the reliability of the results, which I think, we're sort of maybe coming out potentially on different sides of, but isn't there a benefit to the process too?
Yeah, no, I think, I don't think that I think there's maybe an elevated presence to like a state exam versus a unit exam or a midterm or a final. But I don't think there's like a big kind of like added value to a state exam. You can still prepare kids to be fully ready for like the rigors of college and exams and what that scene looks like in school without the presence of a New York State exam.
Josh, very dumb. I'm sorry. What are the exams used for? The state exams, and why is it such an option?
This year, nothing.
It's not used for anything. What is it used for last year?
Oh, it's used for the reasons that we stated earlier. It offers some indication of kind of growth year by year, both for kids and for schools. It offers a way in which uh, schools and even teachers are held accountable for their success in promoting student learning among kids.
By who?
At the state level, it's used for like federal funding and the degree to which like a state is doing their kids well versus not. So
If we take it this, if kids take it this year, that data will not be used for any of that.
no,
So it'll just be an internal marker of sorts if we
it
choose.
won't even be that because it won't offer that because.
Sure, no,
it
I
won't
take
offer- yeah.
your point on that, but I mean, if kids were to take it, it's some sort of marker that we have. That's at best.
I don't know.
My
It's
point.
an exit exam where we then get the results in August where it's like it's an autopsy at that point. So it just it's not even as good as like STAR, because at least with STAR you can assess and then a week later no results and then act on it. With this, it's an autopsy. Like you
That's
take
the
the
issue
exam
every
in
year,
May
John.
and then you get the results in August.
Okay, but that's every year, that's the issue, right? That's
Yeah.
not a new COVID thing, so.
No, it's not, but it provides just a general comparative advantage to like some of the other exams we can use versus relying on state exams for assessing growth.
How does it work with renewal? Because they do look at test scores.
They're not. If they can't use it this year, they'll look at other measures. And so what they'll do, and what they've said is they'll try to use, as schools supply it, other measures of assessment. And so we could provide our STAR data, we could provide AP data, but my sense is like they're going to look at things that are cleaner, such as graduation, such as demographics, such as finances, such as those sorts of things, where like we're in very strong standing with regard to a full renewal come next year based on that data.
When are the exams getting administered?
ELA is in a week, and math is a month from now. For middle school, for grades 3 through 8, and then high school, Regents exams, where like again, there's no, typically with Regents exams at the high school, those are there's teeth to those for kids in that like kids need to pass those exams in order to sort of like then obtain credit toward graduation. They're not doing that this year. Like they canceled the August Regents exams. They're holding June only for select exams, but course grades are what will replace the marker or the requirement that would have been Regents exam results in the past. So if, for example, in Algebra 1, a student scores an 80 in the course, then that grade would stand in for what would have been the Regents exam score.
So you're just telling kids who didn't score a good enough grade to go take the Regents? Is that what you mean when you say when it benefits them to do so?
Yeah, there may be some cases in which, like in prior years, so there's select cases, and I was chatting with Melissa, our co-principal this year about that. If you've got a kid who perhaps scored a 75 2 years ago on the Algebra 1 exam, and an 80 is kind of like a sort of CUNY minimum. It's kind of like the college ready indicator score. It might be worth having kids test again. Maybe they're taking Algebra 2 now and taking the Algebra 1 exam from 2 years ago again now might help boost their score, which then might offer some open doors to them in the colleges they apply and get into. Melissa's sense there was that like it'd be better to have that student score especially well in Algebra 2 in the course, because doing that would benefit a student more than increasing their Algebra 1 exam score from 2 years ago. So there's a trade-off here. Do we focus on exams that are not consequential to kids or school, or do we right now focus on grades? And right now, the indication from the state, based on the game that we're playing and don't call the shots, are that grades matter most in benefiting kids. So I feel like that's what we got to focus our time on.
Just in terms of the time, though, it's like if you're not teaching to the exam, you're talking about giving up basically 1 day of classroom work.
No, I would say it depends on the high school, middle school. I mean, typically, if we're preparing for exams, we might take a month at the middle school to prepare for those. with regard to mock exams, in regard to like small group interventions based on standards. There's a lot. It's like a semester in itself. At the high school, we're going to have about 2 additional weeks of school that typically would be regents kind of like testing time. So picture college semester finals where you don't have class for a week and a half and you're just cramming for exams. They do that at the high school level in New York too. I think it's a complete waste of time, but they do that. And then kids only show up for exams, but don't have school or classes during that time. What we'll do instead is extend the runway. Look, we've got some kids who are on the struggle bus with regard to remote learning. And so we want to double down and help them earn passing grades and credits to courses that they might not otherwise pass, and then could be in real jeopardy of not earning credit in a time that allows them to graduate in 4 years. So to me, the best thing for kids is to take that 2 weeks of study time on a Regents exam that really doesn't matter this year and devote it instead to remediation and additional class time, because we've also had to go slower because of the scene, because of the way in which instruction is provided, and because there's slightly less class time than what we have during a regular school day and year in person. So yeah, it's messy, but I'm doing what I think is best for kids in school this year, which is certainly not what's best for schooling kids in other years.
Have you talked to the other Josh about this?
I have.
What's his view?
He's 100% in agreement with me, and he's coming from a network common, and like normally, like me, tests are a big deal. It's good. Like, let's figure out who's doing well and who's not, and like help kids who are not, and then help teachers who perhaps are underperforming, hold them accountable to it, and then the school too. I'm all about it.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, I have to say, I'm listening and I'm not hearing something that I find convincing. So, I understand it's too late now if it's in a week and we would have prepared for a month. But
yeah,
I still don't see
the
it from
compelling
there.
headlines for me are like, don't take a test that's a bad test. That's not going to give you good
Yeah,
data.
but if you're positing it's a bad test, then everything flows from there, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And then I think the other thing is like, there's a trade-off with regard to then what we're devoting our time to during this time for a bad test. So it's just like, it's like searching for some magical treasure and knowing that that treasure really doesn't exist, but doing it anyway, because it's just like, hypothetically, maybe it does offer something.
Yeah, I think I'll just leave it at the fact that because there's so much upheaval and so much difference, I think I would have wanted more data, not less. And so I find this disappointing, but it's also too late to talk about it because the whole infrastructure is now geared towards not preparing kids to take it. So
Yeah.
I think we should have had this discussion 2 months ago.
If I were wearing a political hat, and I was thinking about the school system as a chancellor or as a council member or a mayor, I'd be thinking about this differently. I'm thinking about 535 kids at our school and families and what's best for them this year. And I don't think that requiring a test is good for families and kids this year. And we can lean on the other data we have, which isn't as good as other years of data, but is better than state testing data this year.
Well,
I agree with Marianne that sort of like maybe at this point, we're not going to convince you on this call and it's got to be your decision. But I guess just sort of to take your hypothetical of if you're wearing a policymaker's hat, I actually think it's sort of like the policymakers chose this because they didn't want to be held accountable, and we're sort of choosing not to be held accountable either.
Yeah. I think what comes to mind, Jake, there is that again, I'm accountable to our families and our kids, and I do think this is the best decision for them this year. And I think, but I think just to take some value here, this is if the ask here, if the request is like, hey, can we, this would have been better to talk about a couple of months ago. I can take that. The issue is that I didn't know this until 3 weeks ago. Like, this has been really laid out the gate with regard to like the guidance we're getting from state. And so we had to kind of move on this and make decisions based on what we thought was best within this short time frame. And it sucks. It's ugly, but
One last question. Is it the test going to be bad next year as well? There's going to be a bad test next year?
I don't see that. I just think there's not a prior years. There's not 2 years. Like, so just thinking ahead, we wouldn't have 2 years worth of prior data to compare against. We'd have to go back 3 years. So like, this is a big deal with regard to like testing and like reliability and being able to sort of track growth and progress over time. Like, it's a huge divot with regard to like being able to do that cleanly. So it's like having like just breaking it down. Like if we're talking about an individual student, it's a student not having test data for 2 years, but we're talking about an entire system in the state not having data for 2 years. So like what SCD has then said to then try to hold schools accountable is like, give us the data you have. And then we'll try to make some sort of assessment about the degree to which your kids are learning. And then we're also going to look at some of these other measures that are important. How many of your kids are logging in every day? What's the attendance levels? What's going on? Can we come and see classrooms? That kind of thing. And that's just the best they can do with regard to the limitations that exist. So I've got a visit with SED very likely during the second week in May. Well, they'll come in, they'll visit some classes. I'll give them some data, and it'll be fine. But that's what they're able to do from like an authorizer standpoint this year.
Okay, but I think the question that flows from Sal is, are we going to have this discussion next year where you said there's no point having kids?
I don't know.
We don't have the prior year.
I wish I could. I don't know. I tend to be optimistic and say this is going to be a really great 2021-22 and things be back to normal and like we'll be fully in session, and that's the vision we're acting on and moving forward with. But I don't know. So I can focus on things within our control, which is kids attending and enjoying and appreciating and learning in school every day, and setting kids up to earn credit toward graduation, earn their diplomas, have those doors open, help them apply to college, get into college, and then support them in college. And that to me is a much better game for us to play this year in impacting pathways for kids.
All right, well, I think we're just going to have to agree to disagree a little bit because poor Leslie has been waiting for half an hour listening to us talk about this. I think
this is riveting for her, isn't it? Leslie, how many other boards are you a part of that get to, sort of like, you get to like really hear awesome, rigorous debate?
Quite a few.
Okay, quite a few. All right. So
I actually found this interesting. I found this interesting.
Okay. Cool. So let's jump around, and if you could give us the snapshot
Sure.
on finance as of the end of February, that'd be terrific.
Sure. Yep. So I met with the finance committee last Friday, so they're aware of the report that I'm going to give you today. So notes for February 2021, net income is expected to be $192,688 compared to a budget of $193,752. The changes that we're actually going to be below budget by $1,064. This is a change from last month, and I'll go through the highlights of where those changes are coming from. In regards to revenue is actually flat from where we were at last month. So we're actually going to be better than budget by $175,438. Where we're seeing a lot of the fluctuations comes in expenses. We did a true up about compensation expenses. So what that means is that we looked at currently who's working in the school, all of the new hires, and projected those salaries out to the end of the year. And we saw a difference compared to last month of roughly about $65,000. Some of that increase is going to be offset by the ESSER CARES grant. As you know, we were also granted the CSP COVID grant, and we were able to use some of the funding for that grant as well. Marianne, I was able to get an answer to your question in regards to if we can cover payroll taxes in regards to those grants. We can do it only if the employee is a newly hired employee that was hired because of COVID.
Okay, great.
It can't be used for someone who a portion of their time is being used for COVID. So what we did is that as we looked at the increase in the compensation, we looked around in various areas to see where we can find some offsets. So as you know, we took some offsets in regards to transportation, whereas at one point we only cut like a half of the year of transportation, but now with the kids not, with the students not returning to school, we took another month of transportation. We also looked at things where substitute services, where because we don't have a lot of in-school learning, that we took a little bit more of a positive variance for things like substitute services. Other than that, everything else is pretty much the same of where we were last month. We're still continuing to look at our expenses to see what else can be used for the ESSER CARES grant. Because we had the COVID, we transferred some of those funds to that grant. So now we have more dollars to use for the ESSER CARES grant. And just as another note, because of the passing of this additional trillions of dollars in funding, there may also be another grant that's coming down the pike that might be allocated to charter schools as well. We were just notified of it. We don't know what that allocation is going to be as of yet. But
Wait, was that for this year or next year?
Well, I was going to say that, Josh. We're anticipating that those funds will probably be available for next year.
Okay.
Because we may also have some of the ESSER CARES grant to carry over into next year as well, because that grant period goes until 2022. So with that being said, as I mentioned, our full year projected net income is expected to be $192,688. Any questions before I move on to cash flow? So cash on hand as of the end of February is roughly $5.1 million. Keep in mind that, of course, that includes the PPP CARES loan, but I also want to make it a point that as of the end of February, we also receive our 5th per pupil installment. So that's why the balance appears to be extremely high. Without the PPP CARES loan, we have roughly about $3.5 million. That represents 150 days of cash on hand, 104 days of cash on hand without the PPP loan. So we're still in a good position because, of course, we're over that 90-day threshold. Cash to be carried over into next year is $3,096,293. Without the PPP CARES, it's about $1.5 million. Cash on hand at FOMB is roughly about $1.3 million, which is $1,283,326. Any questions?
In other words, things are okay right now.
Yeah. And I also want to say, I don't know if everyone has gotten a chance. Marion, I think this is more or less for you. The taxes are due May 15th.
Yeah,
And I think I've given some input.
I think we were fine with your latest round of responses to our comments, but I will confirm that.
Okay, thank you. Because I want to get that to you for signature, for the e-sign sooner rather than later.
Who signs this? I don't think it's me. I don't remember.
It's Josh.
Is it? Okay.
Is it you or Josh? I forget. In some schools, the board treasurer signs it. In others, it may be.
Okay, I don't think I've signed it before, but I don't know how long I've been the treasurer. I
don't recall. Yeah, I don't recall the
figure-
treasurer signing in the past.
Yeah, then it might be you, Josh. Okay, I'm getting confused with.
Okay, we'll check.
Yep, I'll look at last year. And that is my report for this month.
Leslie, thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you guys so
Take care
much.
now.
Have a good
Bye-bye.
night. Okay.
So my proposal would be that there are a couple of other items with the school leader report that I think we should double back on, and then I think the rest of the agenda will be all of 5 minutes. Sound good? All right. So so we talked about testing at length. Good conversation. Appreciate the pushback. let's move on to just the max enrollment revision and just an update there. Jim and I got on the phone with David Frank and Paulo and another rep from NYSED about 2-3 weeks ago. And coming out of that call, the recommendation from SED is that we do not apply for the revision. And I think that the general sense, the takeaway from me was that there's going to be no consequence to us being at 82, 81.5% max percentage, given our enrollment now, according to David. And he sent an email to confirm that. In that the sort of downside, the potential downside of asking for the max revision going into the renewal year next year, where there could be political feelings on the part of those making that decision, wasn't worth it. So I trust that take. He then offered just some data to Jim and me with regard to what he's seeing from our school, and offered a pretty positive review of like our progress and our stature in our renewal proposal next year, given what we've done the past couple of years. So it felt like a good call, felt supported, and that's where things stand. I think the last piece.
Wait, can you give like a couple more? Like, I thought in renewal they looked at percentage.
Yep.
That we, compared to max enrollment.
Yep.
And I thought it mattered whether you were above or below certain thresholds. So why do we think it now doesn't? Like what?
My takeaway is that we're close enough to 85, and the simple change from 655 to 615 as our max enrollment would like clean this up. David understands that and sees this as a technicality, and then sees us sort of going to the Board of Regents and asking for renewal or asking for that change. Because it's kind of a political entity, people have different opinions on charters, and like asking for a change to enrollment either might not be approved, or it might be sort of frowned upon in some way that then may put a sour taste in the mouths of those who are then making renewal decisions next year. And so David senses that we hold from this, we can revisit it next fall, but he doesn't see this being an issue with regard to renewal. In fact, he thinks there could be more downside to asking for the change now, moving into renewal, particularly among Regents members who might be a bit less in favor of charters.
Could you get a sanity check on that from Paul or whoever we're thinking of hiring to help with the renewal? I mean, I'm sure that's right, but I would feel better if somebody confirmed that that makes sense.
I mean, David wrote in a note, he followed up with an email and said, hey, this is what we'll do in the coming year. So to me, that suffices. I can forward you the note.
But David doesn't have, I mean, David doesn't have that.
He makes the decision. He'll make the decision ultimately about whether to bring us to the Board of Regents for no renewal, a 3-year renewal, and then 5-year renewal.
Okay, so it's him before the Board of Regents.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and do we have anyone we can talk to about the Board of Regents view?
Yeah, the recommendation, I mean, there's some talk we can kind of get into, but yeah, there are a couple of folks who we should probably reach out to, and I've attempted to in the past and haven't had as much luck. I tried to do so before our last renewal. Didn't matter anyway, but we're not the only school trying to jockey there.
Okay, just want to make sure, it's different from what we were told before, so I just.
Yeah, it is. It's similar to like that kind of like how hard is the 90 days of cash on hand? Is that like real hard? To what degree they frown on that? It's the same kind of thing where you get slightly different answers depending on who you ask. So that's that. And then I think the final piece is just that we were awarded a grant from the state for $125K to upgrade aspects of our high school building, specifically our windows. And so I thank Brandon Lopez for just, instead of asking for a more modest amount, like decide to be pretty aggressive and ask for an amount that would totally take care of our needs, given some of the noise complaints, et cetera, with regard to windows. And so we're ready to kind of use that when we know more about our needs facility wise in the coming year. So that's available.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And that is the update for the school report. With regard to the dashboard, I just say there's one update, and that's that enrollment is now at 535 instead of the 532 or 533 listed. We've had a couple of middle school students enroll as a part of our outreach for next year. So we're one from our budgeted enrollment right now. That's the only update in the dashboard. And then I think strategic planning is more of a, like, we talked a bit about plans for the spring, fall, and summer already. And I think in executive session, we can have some conversation about facility related stuff, some org chart stuff that I want to get into, and other next year related matters. And so committee wise, we've covered everything that we talked about in SLC, I believe. Jake, does that seem right to you too? So that feels good. ECPC, we're making some moves with regard to some ideas on murals for the external front of our building. And so I'm excited by that. It's just in process. With DFC, I think, as I said, my school report, where there's been some back and forth with the landlord about negotiations, and it's still sort of in process. And so I'd say that's the headline right now. And then with AFC, I guess beyond what Leslie has said, Mario, is there anything else you'd add? There may have been one thing that Chris and you talked about benefiting from approval this meeting versus next meeting. I just don't remember.
Yeah, so it's not, I can give an update, but it's not right for approval. It's the health plan. And the, most of the components came back with flat rates or slight decreases or slight increases. That seemed fine to me. The medical plan, which is a primary driver of cost, came with a 6-point-something% increase, which it seemed to me was not cool, given utilization last year during COVID was a fraction of what it would have been in a previous year, and that they must have saved a lot of money. So Chris and I talked to Matt, the broker, this morning, asked him to go back to Oxford to see if they would give us either a flat or 0% or a smaller increase, which in exchange for not marketing to other providers. And we're hoping to hear back in a couple of days. But open enrollment has to be in May, after when we would have our board meeting. So I think we'll call an executive session if we have to, but I think we should be able to handle this at the next meeting. Hopefully it'll be pretty clear by then what the right course of action is.
Okay. Cool. So I think from there we move on to approvals for this evening, which are only minutes from the March meeting.
So moved.
Mm-hmm.
All in favor?
Unanimous. And I think from there we move on to public comment tonight, and there's no members of the public other than Chris and me, technically. So we move on to now.
I don't think you count as the public, guys.
Yeah, I guess we're employees of schools. And so what I wanted to do very quickly, I wanted to just get a sense of the next couple of months, because it's moving in the spring and it gets kind of busy with action items. So I'm putting this on the screen.
Should I stop the live stream and leave?
What's that? Yeah, hold on about 2 more minutes, Chris.
Okay, thanks.
So we move on to the May meeting and what's coming up. And so you'll see, look, it's because of us being remote for a year and not being in person. There's some things that we haven't done, including like some annual fundraising events, dinner, etc., associate board night, all that. So next month, if we were on the normal timeline, we would have the school calendar coming out. That might be something which holds off till June, but it's possible I can bring it up if we get there by May. And then Marion, typically we have board policies kind of back up in order, and so you'll see them listed. And so those will be on the agenda next meeting.
Yeah,
And then Form 990s, which I'm not sure if that still applies or not.
yeah, yeah,
Yep,
that's the one Leslie was talking about, that one of us will need to sign.
gotcha. And then from there,
That's ready to go.
and then from there, benefits plans and property casualty insurance. So that's the busy next meeting we have, and then June is even busier. So
Hey, Chris, two things. Property casualty, can you just start talking to them and ask them about what their timeline is, number one? And number two, I never heard back from them after that conversation about DNO stuff.
Yes, two things about that. So I just recently, like a day or two ago, found out Sam Bell is no longer with Gallagher. Trying to find out what happened there and who our new rep is. I was working on the renewal packet with them in addition to reaching out to other brokers already. So I'm hoping to have quotes by the May board meeting. I'll let you know if that timeline doesn't work, and I will reach out to whomever replaced Sam to pick up that conversation.
Can you also reach out to the guy who was on that phone call?
Sure, absolutely. I'll find
Their
out. Yeah,
DNO guy who seems very knowledgeable and just might be able to help.
my pleasure. Yep.
The question was, if we're gonna do the building financing and issue those bonds, can we make sure the boards of both entities are adequately protected? And they were gonna tell us what coverage they recommended, and they didn't. So we just need to hear back. from them.
I'll reach out to them again, and I'll reach out to that person who was on that call.
Thank you.
No problem.
okay, thanks, Chris. And then I thought, do I have to do this?